Our topic today, the federal intelligence careers, is going to be recorded, and we will be sharing that on our YouTube later on. So I'm going to turn it over to Michael Cassidy and Erin Ferree. These are representing the webinar today, and they are representing the National Security Career and Leadership Institute. So the floor is yours, Michael.
Thank you very much, Wendy. And thank you, everybody, for joining us today. So as mentioned, my name is Mike Cassidy. Lurking also in here along with us is Erin Ferree, who is also present, but also one of our other great career coaches is Kit Thompson, who currently serves as a senior intelligence officer with DIA and is one of our great coaches as well. So figured I'd bring the A team for you today to really talk about what we all are always excited about, is how to help people from across the country really get access to the opportunities of joining the intelligence community. So the focus of today's discussion is we're going to walk through a little bit about how we go about doing how this can work. See if I just did that. There we go. See, I can make this work. So again, thank you very much for coming today. So a little bit about myself and sort of give you a perspective before we jump into a bit. So I've been in and out of the intelligence community for over about 25 years. It started as an infantry officer with the 101st Airborne Division, having studied Chinese and international relations in college. After about 3 or 4 years, figured I wanted to do something different. And then since there is no set path, joined the Defense Intelligence Agency, where I served both for about 10 years or so with them, both in Bolling Air Force Base in Washington, D.C., and then overseas in Tokyo, Japan. Got to see a lot of different parts and work in and out of the different elements in different roles within the intelligence community. So whether it's analysis, operations, collection management, science and technology, I've touched a lot of there. And this is really where I'm going to inform and provide you some insights into not only just what are the arrays of opportunities, but how best position yourself to it. So the purpose of the discussion that we have, and we're going to talk about 35 minutes, 40 minutes, and then hopefully open up the questions so we can have a conversation about the questions that you're having about this process, is to give you a framework for essentially finding the right spot for you. This is a key process, and we'll talk a little bit of why I think this is, but it's really important to understand that going through this process, it is more important from where you start, is basically how you see the world and how you approach it. So we're tailoring this process and to think about how to basically find the right spot for yourself. The second is really then how to craft a winning application. How to put all the pieces together, what are the key elements of it, how do you interact with the key intricacies of some of the challenges as well, and trying to get into the intelligence community and putting it together so that at the end of the day, you have a great opportunity to serve country in a unique and a powerful way. So at the end, we'll also open it up and you have any questions that you may have. There's a Q&A function. Erin is going to be monitoring that as well. And so at the end of it, we'll have the opportunity to answer some of the questions that you're focused on. So let's get started a little bit. The process that we go through initially is really talk about a different way. We always start with the most important thing. We talk about roles, domains, and organizations. So the biggest thing that you want to start with, and the first question that you have to think about is, okay, what is it that is, in order to try to figure out how to get into the intelligence community, is how to really think about it in a unique way. One of my universal theories about this is that getting a job in the intelligence community is less about getting a job. It's more like pledging a sorority and fraternity. It's really about fit. And if you think about it, it makes sense in terms of they're not hiring you for a specific job that's going to last 6 months to a year. They're hiring you for a career. All the process that you have to go through, from the assessments to the clearances to all those aspects. And also the fact of no one walks into the intelligence community, or very few people do, walk into the intelligence community with intelligence experience. They will train you. They will give you everything that you need to know to do the work that needs to be done. So long-term vision, long-termism in terms of the process, as well as then knowing that the training and no one walks in. The focus of the entire process for assessments and applications is really just finding about the right fitting. And the number one way to start with, and what I also think about is The fit starts with the role. Most people start with thinking about organizations. We always talk about first and foremost, what is the role that you take? And what do I mean by that? Ultimately, the first and foremost is whoever, and we'll talk in a little more detail what makes them distinct. But if you come into the process and trying to apply as an analyst sees the world very differently than a collector or some other roles. So the key aspects that we talk about when we're doing discernment or talking and figuring out the best place to start with is how do you see the world and how do you interact with it and make meaning from it? Are you a big picture kind of person? Where you like to think deliberately, like to be able to put puzzles together, like to do all that, or are you action oriented or hyper focused? That's going to be a key part of finding the right role and fit. The other aspect is not just about how you think and make meaning of the world, but also the matter of what is your end product? What do you want to deliver? How is it that you feel satisfied? You know that you've done some work and had some impact. Is that writing reports? Is that being out in the field talking to folks? Is that those things together? Where do you gain that satisfaction of knowing that you have that end goal? And then the final is thinking about what are the problems you want to solve. Doing this work in the intelligence community, in my belief, is this is a mission-driven career. So as a result, most of the people who arrive in this usually arrive at it with some semblance of there is a problem in the world. There's something you want to protect, some dealing with some threat you want to counteract, or is there something that you want to be? So having a better sense of your own feeling of what is driving you towards and what problems you are is a key starting point from identifying what is the right role for you. And I think I've alluded to what the differences are. So we're going to start with the analyst, where I started my work there. The analyst, and we'll talk as an all-source analyst, and there are several different types of analysts that are out there, but we're going to start with on the one end of the pillar is the all-source analyst. The job is ultimately taking and gathering disparate pieces of information from various sources: signal intelligence, human intelligence, geospatial intelligence, could be technical intelligence like FISIN or measures in signals intelligence, what they call MASINT. Putting that piece together and then ultimately running through an analytic process to arrive at a judgment, making a judgment, and then communicating that in verbal or in briefing form or in written form very cogently and quickly to ultimately policymakers or some customers. That is the job. And most days, the job is sitting behind a computer, being able to, the way I would best describe it is being the most well-sourced journalist that there is without having to actually go and actually run your own beat. It's a way to think about it. So who does well with that? And who to approach? Those are people who are generally see forest through trees. They like to think strategically about it. They like to dive deep onto issues of it. It could be a weapons platform, like a specific aircraft. It could be a geographic region. But nevertheless, they like to think about it. But they also are able to think critically about not only the issues that they're facing, but evaluate the types of sources that they're working through, be able to say, hey, does that make sense? How do I weigh the various pieces of information? Putting it together in a complex story, particularly because as an analyst, you're never going to have the complete picture. So being able to have that, even as resourceful as you want to be demonstrating to drive new pieces of information and new sources of information, you have to be able to do that in order to put the puzzle together. But to do that, also as part of a team, you're working with not only your own selves. And differentiation, or what in many cases when I'm working with students who are coming into, the biggest transition challenge that many folks have is you're in school, you write a product or write a paper, you're judged on your own. In the Intel community, as an all-source analyst, when you write a product, it quickly becomes from your product to your team's product to your agency's product before it goes on to Secretary of Defense, President of the United States. It is becoming that process. So ultimately, the only way that works is working collaboratively as a team. If you have on one side of the analyst who thinks big picture, the other side is a collector. When I say collector, I think in general terms, most people think about human operations. So a clandestine case officer or operations officer, as they call it in the CIA these days, or even elements or in other places like DIA that do human operations. There are other collectors and technical aspects of it, but for right now, it's the biggest ones are there. This person is very different. While as most people have to think about an operations officer or a case officer, they think in James Bond's terms, being over the embassy, having a double life, going to cocktail parties and other things like that. The reality is it's a little more mundane, but it's also exciting in its own self. But the key to it is, and I always discern who best goes into that role as often the people who are hyper focused, and the job there is then that they want to be able to work towards is identifying people in place, replacement of access of information that's beneficial to the United States. At that point, once they've spotted and assessed that person, their job is then to manipulate those relationships to the point, get to know everything about them, find out what makes them vulnerable, and then manipulate those relationships to the point where that individual basically betrays the country, commits a crime, and then provides that information on the United States for whatever motivation that they have. The reason why I note that is because a very strong part of that work, and whoever goes that, most people think about, when I talk with many students, they think, oh, I like to speak foreign languages, or I like to travel or specs. Those are elements of the job. That's not the core of the job. The core of the job is being able to develop relationships, manipulating those relationships, and maintaining control over those relationships. In order to do that, you have to have intellectual agility, work in ambiguous and high threat environments, have resiliency because there's going to be a lot of setbacks, but also have to be very comfortable with those type of work. And we'll talk a little bit more about the questions and how that is discerned later in that process. So those are the two sort of pillars on the outside. There's a myriad of roles on the in between and the levels of it, and there's usually spans between it. So, like if you're not just close to the operations officer, you have a collection management officer or CMO. You also have a staff operations officer in the CIA parlance. Those are individuals who work closely with the case officers to identify either one, what are the questions they need to be asking, or in the SUE or the staff operations, what are the logistics, everything they need to be able to put together for a clandestine human operation. There's also places like an SAT officer that helps develop the capabilities that enable clandestine operations, whether listening devices, other things that be able to protect, either be able to run those and make sure that they're protecting sources and methods that way. And then in the middle, there are folks that are like targeting officers. Those are people who build the dossiers for individuals that we may have placement and access, and targeting analysts, and then look across the network. It could be a terrorism network to be able to identify who do we need to or may be able to apply pressure and or deal with those threats, figuring out more broadly. Outside of that, there are also different types of analysts that are out there. So there are geospatial analysts over at the NGA, National Geospatial Intelligence Agency, as well as then support roles like security specialists, legislative affairs, international affairs specialists. That's actually a thing, or at least an international engagement officer that we have and work with allies across the board. Any number of different roles. But the core role comes back to, as you think about and assess, is, again, how do you think about it? What are the problems you want to solve? Speaking of the problems you want to solve, the next thing we talk about, not just in roles, but we also talk about domains. There is no domain right now as it comes to defense and national security where intelligence does not play a critical role. It doesn't matter if it is dealing with, traditionally we think in terms of regional. We think about China, we think of Russia, we think of Ukraine, we think about or Africa. Most people think are associated with that as a background. But I will tell you that there are intelligence professionals that are working and supporting using the same type of intelligence methods, collection and analysis, to be able to enable any number of different domains, from cyber operations, as well as then other things like counterterrorism, which is historically driven for the last 20 years, to now more advanced things in terms of what we're dealing with is, space and counterspace is becoming a big aspect of it. Critical tech protection and counterintelligence. How do we protect our own technologies and secrets from adversaries' laws? There is a myriad of different opportunities out there. So it's really a matter of, okay, if I'm going to think about what am I doing in terms of my role, and then what problem do I want to solve in what domain, that starts to put the pieces together specifically for you to look to the right opportunities. The final piece in terms of it, okay, as you notice, I've gone this far, but I haven't really even talked about the types of organizations and gone down that road, largely because that's where I think about, and then we really get into, that's kind of the last piece of the puzzle, finding out who you are, what problems you want to solve, and then we sort of match up who do you want, where are those missions being done, and ultimately where the culture matches with who, and also is a key part of it. For instance, so we have all the intelligence agencies that are there across the board. They cross everything from the big strategic ones to also your military services, as well as then in the center is the Office of the Director of National Intelligence. first of all, everybody knows about the CIA, the Central Intelligence Agency. They're the premier intelligence organization in the United States. All you have to do is just ask them; they'll tell you that's the case. Central Intelligence Agency is one of the broad aspects, is one of the largest ones, covers down a myriad of mission sets. It is largely, when we talk about cultures, an interesting thing that most people don't recognize is that, unlike some of the other intelligence agencies we'll talk about, the Central Intelligence Agency is a human or operations-driven organization. The vast majority of the budget is coming from the operations side. They've gotten better in terms of how they organize, but ultimately, at the end of the day, it is operations-driven. That said, their analytics side is also very important because they have historically served the president as well as in others. But nevertheless, they touch on all of the topics that we've talked about in domains. They have the same type of roles. It is really a one-stop shop in terms of that. But nevertheless, is one of those key ones that most people will really address. The next is on the far left is the National Security Agency, also heavy into signals intelligence. It is probably the largest, in terms of budget and size of the intelligence organizations, and covers the footprint of and is enabled there. One of the key things that most people don't recognize, that I will tell you that any number of other intelligence agencies that do not do their work very well unless NSA is doing their work very well. Providing that really hard access to signals intelligence, everything from emails, phone calls, radio frequencies, signals, other types of signals, telemetry data. Those are the key things that in many cases, when we can't have access to it because we can't put humans there, having that access is a critical piece of it. So NSA plays a massive role in terms of supporting everywhere else. Each of them, you can also see that each of the services that have each of the service intel centers. So like Office of Naval Intelligence, as well as the National Air and Space Intelligence Center coming under, that been separated now that you have an air part of it. And you also have the newest one, which is National Space Intelligence Center. Both are at the same location and date. Nevertheless, are playing key aspects, and what differentiates them is an ability that what they do work on and provide analytic as well as all source products and will support to the services, from everything from their acquisitions to their operations, to be able to do that. Others, a little bit of a homer is the defense intelligence, from where I come from the Defense Intelligence Agency. Countermeasure like that covers down as the premier, at least from the analytic program or Defense Intelligence analytic program. They're the foremost providing strategic or defense-related intelligence for the Secretary of Defense, as well as the combatant commands. They cover down on all of this combatant commands and provide the intelligence professionals there. It is an analytic-driven organization. Though it covers down and does have its own defense clandestine service, as well as then technical and measures and signals intelligence as well. Then finally, we have over there, and I'll talk about the FBI, for instance. And one people don't believe, oftentimes think about it as being part of the intelligence service, intelligence community. But again, he's in one of those areas where it plays. Being an intelligence analyst, for instance, though, in terms of art, intelligence analyst at FBI, for instance, is very different than being also an intelligence analyst at DIA. An intelligence analyst at FBI is much more akin to a targeting officer, someone who does and works side by side with case agents, so special agents, to be able to develop cases as well as identify and prevent whether that leads to a law enforcement or counterintelligence type of activities. Nevertheless, those are much more targeted and tactical type of levels of intelligence versus providing broad, like national intelligence estimates or type of those assessments. So the reason I talk about this is the question you're going to have to ask as you go through the process is not only, okay, not as the mission does it serve, the culture of the people is, but also what role and how does your role fit within that organization and work there. So it's a very key piece of that puzzle. So we talked about the broad scope and covering a lot of ground in there. So let's talk timelines and pipelines. It always takes longer than you think. It will always take longer than you think. I will tell you that in the last few years, the process to get you from the time that you apply to the time that you get that conditional offer is actually gotten a lot better. In most cases, whether you're applying for CIA, DIA, or major other ones, I'll tell you, are generally between 60 and 90 days to be able to get that first response to it and to know that you're going in through interviews and that process of it. But other organizations that you go, like Office of Naval Intelligence, when you go through USA jobs portals and everything, those may take longer. And it may be just because it has nothing to do with has really almost anything to do with the HR and staffing process on their side. That's only the first hurdle. When we talk about then, you talk about the security screening or the security clearance process, whether that's the background check after you filled out your SF-86, to then taking your polygraph if that is required, to all the drug tests and psychological tests. Those are also required depending on the agency. Those could take anywhere from 4 months to 18 months, and I've seen people actually still get cleared after 2 years. So it is one of those that's very personal, and let's say actually it's about is based on your personal situation. Application windows you're facing, which is kind of you'll see in every year. Every early fall, you'll see most of those organizations that require security clearances will all bunch together at about the same time and have all those opportunities. You'll then see it probably those first go through that whole process and they'll shake out by January, who then be able to make some in terms of job offers and everything else. And then towards the middle of, let's say, March, you'll see another round of for the big agencies for the big budget. That includes both internships as well as full-time jobs. So as a result of that, the pipelines are always taking longer. And I always recommend that what you want to do is you want to first, when you do select what you're going after, find your first couple high priority government ones, and then look for other options there as you and sort of as a result of that, you are not on watching the mail every day. You're actually working and doing those other things. Other backup approaches is, while those are putting in place, go out there and get more skills and experience, whether that's technical skills and coding, data science, things like that are becoming much more of a bigger part of the attractive for these types of organizations. Doing research skills. So if you're an analyst, you're working on a project, doing analysis or doing some type of research outside of that is a key thing. One of the key aspects, even like, for instance, the DIA application process, they're very clear on the fact that experience does not need to be paid. It is something aspects of any valuable experience where you're demonstrating the skills that make a great analyst. That's the kind of things you want to be able to continue to develop. Also, time abroad doesn't hurt. Building language capability are also great opportunities as well. So those are types of things in terms of timelines. Let's still talk a little bit about the specific application process of it. There's not any magic to it in terms of really the standard. They do have some of both things have changed a bit. At the core of it starts with a resume. Now, some things require a resume for that. So for like CIA, for instance, we'll have drive toward a one-page resume that focuses on both your education, experience, then the last for your leadership skills, as well as skills, and then sort of distinctions at the bottom. They have I tell you, CIA does have a very good regimented approach to it. DIA, on the other hand, for their entry-level types of activities, gets rid of the resume. They don't even look at the resume. What they do is they have narrative, sort of a combination of a cover letter and resume melded in one for each experience. So they give you 700 words to talk about each of your experiences with it. Don't advise using all 700, but nevertheless, they want to be able to, when you look at each of those experiences, they want to get a sense on what did you do, how did you accomplish, what did you accomplish, why did it matter, so they can really understand, give a sense on do you or haven't demonstrated the interest and skills, and as well as to be in those there. Now each of the applications are all going to be different. NSA does have a different where they'll do closer to a one page. Most of the intelligence organizations will do that as well. Others will also fold in narrative statements. Used to be a cover letter, most of them going away towards narrative statements. At the end of the statements, it will tell you is mostly driven at trying to get towards, again, why, in many cases, is really core questions of two things, one of which is why that role or why that organization. So those are the things that are and then ultimately what has prepared you for this opportunity that is there. So being able to going into that, what I would call is a basic sales document, where your sales pitch that is really driven by all the things we've discussed before, having a cogent answers in written form will then get you ready for later, which you're going to have in terms of your interviews. They will also do online written tests like a Hogan or equivalent. They also have a writing test. DIA will give you a 45-minute prompt to be able to write and be able to provide that as well. And then NSA and others will provide language if you're going to be doing SIGINT analysis or something like SIGINT exploitation of that. Interviews today, they have mostly gone, they'll do both in person and virtual. Virtual still sticks around because they'll have a platform to be able to do that and cover down. But nevertheless, we're going to talk a little bit more in detail about the types of interviews that you encounter. Nevertheless, are going to be, I would say, in the vast majority of cases, the interview is where you win or lose the job. Everything up until that point is just generally to just try to get you into that. We'll talk about a little bit of why. So we talked a little bit about some key tips that I consistently encounter with working with students. One of which is follow the instructions. That is something. If at the end of the day is one of those keys, there's very clear guidance in each of the resume portals and process. Part of it is there's an unintentional genius with these processes to demonstrate and reflect whether or not you are a good fit and whether or not you can follow instructions, which is a core part of what the job is as well. The key aspects in each of the experiences, whenever they're given the opportunity, you want to talk about your previous experiences, but rather than thinking about an experience, but think about what was your impact. How did you make either that team, that role, that project better by employing the skills and becoming an impact player on that? That's ultimately when we're looking at someone who wants to get into this work. But really, that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to find people who are mission driven and want to have impact and have demonstrated that before. So we talked a little bit about the cover letter and narrative statements. Think of those. That's where you can really drive towards, as a sales document, it's much more persuasive, but really comes in terms of, it gives an opportunity for those with a diverse background to make the connection with the organization by which you're putting those in, for the cover letters that are in. So interviews. Most interviews for what you're going to encounter here are largely behavioral interviews. There's not a lot of magic to it. You're going to encounter what you've probably been given through the career education or career centers and coaching sessions with them, talking about the STAR: situation, task, action, and result. So they're going to give you a lot of questions about, tell me about a time, and you're going to walk into that process and give them a test. So tell me about a time you've encountered a difficult analytic problem, or made a mistake, or someone has challenged your integrity. They're going to go through each of those things that they've highlighted on their either job description or what they believe makes a great X, and they're going to ask that question where you demonstrated those. Being prepared with about 3 to 5 questions like that is really key. One tip that I often add there, it's not often, is at the end of that process, though, it really opens up a good opportunity to say, this is why whatever that experience has made you better prepared for the opportunity to be an analyst at DIA or something like that. Tying that bow at the end is a really good tip to be able to do. So, but in order to do that, you got to know your whys. Why do you want to work in intelligence? Why do you want to be an analyst or a human case officer? Why that organization and why that role? The key is you want to be able to be prepared both in those answers. You want to be practiced, but you also have to be authentic. These are individuals who spend their lives really understanding and uncovering the human condition. They will know when it's not authentic. So I would highly encourage you to walk into not only prepared, but yourself. If this is the right fit, you'll see it and they'll know it and it will resonate. So as a result, being engaging, working with one of those. One aspect about role play. So there are certain roles within, particularly when it comes to operations, where they'll encounter role playing for us. Where they'll put you in a situation where they'll say, "Hey, you're at a cafe in a random city, and you're sitting down with someone you just developed a relationship that knows you by one name, and then someone else walks in and says, 'Hey, who knows you by another name? What do you do?'" That is then a question of, okay, they put you in that spot and want to see how you think and how you react. That's an area and opportunity where they're really looking for a couple of things. One is, how do you handle ambiguity and a little bit of stress? 2 is also, what actions are you taking? Most of the cases in these things are about action and control, taking control of the situation. So you'll never know what exactly they're going to throw at you from a role playing, but the first thing I always like to talk about is making sure that you're taking action first and control. Same would go in terms of other things where they ask you even a more generalized analytic question about, hey, having a good sense on prepared, not just about what your experiences are, but also the threats and the situations across the globe right now is a question I always like to ask in general. Would be, so if you had to brief the President of the United States on one thing and most strategic threat at this moment, what would you brief them? So having that ability and thinking on your feet about what you would be is a great willingness. And, ultimately, if that question's not asked, inevitably there's going to be a substantive question about what's the present to us now and being able to put that together. So taking ownership and being assertive and during interviews is where a lot of you can begin. So the final, I want to wrap up, given the amount of time, been about 30 minutes, been working through this. There's really a couple of things. I encounter a lot of people who want to go through as they try to get into this business. They get very frustrated by it. They're frustrated by the fact that, one, it's not clear. It's not like you can go out and it's specific. Hey, I know what the criteria to get in is, and I know what those answers, and I just need to either get that GPA or something like that. Or alternatively, there isn't a lot of access to be able to do a lot of networking. So some people are accustomed to be able to do, I need to call, who can I get to there? This is not going to be that case. There's no way in terms of, for most people, I would say 99.9% of the people, you will have to go through that front door. You're going to have to apply. You're going through that process. There's no way you can go through that, particularly when it comes to the entry level part. So, but if you think about it, so as a result of it, where you sit right now, you sit on one side and then through this cloud that's kind of out there, you get bits and pieces of information. You'll hear pitches for webinars like this. You'll get advice for people that you may know who are in the business. And you have to put that pieces together, run it through some type of methodology for your own and apply it to it so that you can then put together the best product that you have, your resumes, your cover letters. So if you really think about it, there's an unintentional genius to this process. And that is the fact of, if you're frustrated by the process of getting in, quite frankly, you're going to be frustrated with the job itself. Because once you're inside, you will never know if you're going to be totally right. You're never going to have the complete picture. You're never going to know when you're dealing with it, in those types of ambiguous and high threat environments. So really the process, there's an unintentional genius with this is that, the ambiguity and the frustration that you may encounter, it's kind of intentional. Is being able to see who can handle it through that process. So I also say, the sort of the next kind of universal theory is, think about it as in order to do the job, in order to get the job, you got to do the job. You got to start thinking like an intelligent professional. How would someone who would be in that role handle those types of those circumstances? What are the things you would do? Create it and make it as an intelligence problem. Those are the things that can either ultimately take a little bit of the stress off. And if it really resonates with you and this is the right job for you, you'll almost find it a little fun for that process. So that combined with, I will tell you, having done now coached for about 8 years and having worked with close to 2,000, about 1,500 students be able to cross trying to get through in this business. I've worked with people from a wide variety of backgrounds. And that's really what's defined our mission here is the reason why we do this is I have seen many, many people from both walks of life be able to get in. There's no necessarily there's no saying, hey, I have a specific criteria to be able to get in. What I see, and particularly when I'm on the inside with it and working day to day, whether it's in the Pentagon or other parts of it, I do see other people from a wide variety of life. So what is the key is how is it they are getting in? And I believe, quite frankly, the reason is that what really defines it is how you approach this application process. How do you put those together with your roles, the problems and domains and the organization, that match and that fit, that opens the door for you. And so as a result of that, doing that thought, even though it will take a lot of patience, it will take a lot of, it's kind of when one of the things is kind of maybe even like, it's kind of like pushing over a vending machine. You got to tip it a couple of times and may not go over on the first try. But ultimately, if this is something that you feel in your heart of hearts and desires to do, the opportunities are there. It's just finding that right fit for it. So I've covered a lot in a very short amount of time. And I know that there may be a lot of questions enabled to it. So I'm happy to answer anything. And I know as well myself or Kit or Erin may be able to maybe add some insight to some of the more pressing things that you have on your mind.
So Mike, to kick us off, we received a question about networking. I know it's a recommended strategy for many other industries, What's the advice about how to do that in the IC?
So it's a little different, largely because most people who are in the IC, unlike myself or some others that are not usually accustomed to being so out. So it's not so much, it's not something where you can come from way outside to be able to on LinkedIn say, hey, I'd like to have a chat or something like that. So networking kind of is a little bit frustrating because most people see it in a different way. I will tell you that the purpose of networking for in this domain is also a little different than it would be in some other careers. What you want to do is you see networking and having these informational interviews with people, because you're going to have to go through the actual front door anyway. You want to use these as sort of gathering information to it. You want to sort of, you're gathering intel on these organizations, not state secrets, but you're gathering sort of what makes a great person or analyst at CIA, or what makes a great person there. It's a way to be able to help shape and get a better understanding so that when you are putting in your application, it resonates with, or you can better reflect and be able to do that. So like any other good informational interview or networking thing, focus on connection versus transactions. No one's going to be able to give you a job offer. What you want to do is you want to start building that connectivity such that, one, maybe you gain insight immediately, and then over later in time, actually start building up a real network by which you can leverage future opportunities.
Thanks. We have another question in the chat from earlier. Wendy asks about military experience. It seems like vets would have a strong advantage. How does veterans' preference play out? And is it accounted for? What are some things our military connected students should keep in mind?
So there's a difference in the federal system between competitive service and accepted service. For most of I would think all of the intelligence officer roles, so a 0132, that is considered accepted service. Competitive service are those that are there. As a result, military preference or military comes more into play with your 5-point and 10-point in the competitive service rules than it would be in the accepted service rules. And I actually defer that a little bit more to you, Erin, given your background on that one. But my understanding is that when it comes to on the intel side, it is not as onerous that for every application or that they can see that they have to select everyone with a 5-point before they can consider something else. It is actually a little less of a weight bearing. Is that correct?
It is. It varies a lot by the particular role in the entity. And I think the big thing to know is a lot of competitive service agencies that are hiring intelligence adjacent roles that some of your students might be interested in as well. They'll be, if they're military connected and they, were honorably discharged or are have that DD 214 available, it's something that can help them in the process, right? Like it doesn't hurt to disclose your status. And if they are, a lot of agencies use something we call category rating, which is instead of just giving you a raw score and then veterans getting 5 or 10 more points, they're evaluating you on their competencies and qualifications for the job and putting everybody in kind of like category buckets. And so the veterans in the top category will surface to the top, but you need to be qualified for the role and you have to prove that still in your application process.
I wanted to add something, which is number one, for many of these roles, having military service gives you a leg up in terms of the qualifications that they're looking for, right? Maybe you've had the opportunity to go to a foreign country. Maybe you know something about foreign military capabilities. You certainly know something about leadership and other related things. So that's one thing, which is the experience itself may help you be more qualified. The other thing is I can speak as someone who's been a recruiter in the Defense Department, and is to say that it's not so much veterans' preference as it is considering veterans at every single step to say, if we can hire a veteran, we want both their skills and we want to look favorably upon their service. And it is considered, I know at DIA, at every single step to say, as long as the person is qualified to do the job, it doesn't, overcome that, but it's something that's looked favorably upon at every step in the process. Thanks.
Thanks, Kip.
I have a question. Michael, thanks for speaking today. Wendy, Erin, and Ashley, thanks for setting this up. My question would be, or maybe you could make some comments on the different kinds of skill sets that are being looked for. I tend to think of cybersecurity, but you could branch probably to language, to psychology, to cultural skill sets. I'm a scientist and a math person, but artistic, but I think it's a pretty broad set of skills. Can you just comment on how that should be conveyed to people that might want to pursue this career? What is a broad array of skill sets useful here?
So every single one of the skill sets you mentioned is valuable or needed. And they're even others would think of in terms of free law, biotechnology, others in terms of even. So there's no that. What I would say is in terms of what I usually talk to people who come from the non-history, those types of things. It's more about what dent do they want to put into the universe? How do they want to apply that skill for that? And ultimately, it's tying that connection to sort of impact and service for those, and then matching it up with then that right domain and role. For instance, I've watched some people I've seen make career transitions from Wall Street into this role. They've taken what their quantitative skills that they're doing to be able to work there, have felt a longing, although that's nice, working long hours, being able to make that kind of coin, but applying that then to this type of, having a greater impact on the overall security of the country and as well as then overall security of the world. So all that I would say is it's a matter of, again, that type of thinking like a mathematician, whether or not you go into the hard S&T skills, whether you're going into the director of science and technology at CIA to help build new capabilities, or using that as quantitative or econometrics type of thing as an all source analysis, those opportunities are there. It's not so as a result of that, I wouldn't say that there's weighted or everyone thinks about, cybersecurity because that's the buzzword, but in reality, every single one of the skill sets are needed, and they will from bachelor's to PhD. And even now we're seeing increasingly number of those. And I think DIA is one of those places that's looking at trade schools and other places, community colleges, where those folks have those basic skills and mindsets that we can still leverage for the mission.
Yeah, thank you. So it's a lot of it's about how would you apply your skills to the mission, or what do you view as the mission? And I think examples could be helpful for students or people thinking early on, like I have a passion in this area, maybe it's languages. How could that be applied towards some of these organizations? I'm not familiar with the specific job ads. That would help some too. I have just one other question, if you don't mind, or ask, and that would be about the military organizations. I could go look this up, but I think I remember a large percentage of folks involved in military intelligence are actually contractors and not part of the military. Could you comment on that just briefly? Maybe it's over 50% are actually contractors. So how does that work? How does the government and those military organizations maintain what they need to maintain by having both military and non-military combined?
Yeah, so the total workforce really is comprised of really three major. So you have government civilians, who will be your GS or your GG scales types. Those are your core ones that there. You then have military uniform personnel. The largest ones of like particularly Army, and because they have the military intelligence, MOSs, Navy, all of them, Space Force, will all have a component of that. They will work individually at their units, but they'll also work at places like NSA, for instance, has a large military presence, and DIA also as well. Even CIA and some other places, I've seen those as well. So they'll have that component as well. And you're right, the third component is what we call the government contractors. And there's really a couple ways there. So you have the those that are serving in terms of they do staff augmentation. So at DIA, they'll have sitting alongside what we call the govies, or the military will all have blue badges, blue IC badges. The contractors we call have green badges. So they sit along and augment with specific skill sets on a shorter term basis for it, or where they'll fill in gaps where they may not have them. Those are sometimes on site, but they'll also have opportunities off site that be able to support with those as well. There's no shortage of in and of itself could be government contractor, could be a presentation unto itself. Having worked in the non-that there, how that works. I will tell you though, generally speaking, in just the rule of thumb, what you want to do is, for someone entering this, is you want to first shoot for government roles to be able to get an opportunity to then, because there's a contractor will value government time more than a government would value contractor time. It seems to be. So start like we talk about a concentric circle of bullseyes working your way out. However, I also tell you though, if that front door is not available, go working to try to find contracting positions where, particularly in the vacancy announcement, because security clearances are often the toughest thing to do, being able to say something where there's phrasing about must be able to maintain a security clearance versus coming in the door with it is a big differentiator. But nevertheless is a viable option for many people.
Thank you. And Kit, thanks for the comments too. I appreciate that.
So, Mike, a few other questions are starting to come through that are security clearance related. I'll preface this by saying, in my experience, varied by different department and agencies, missions and mandates. There's a little bit of variance across the board about what constitutes a red flag, based on what that particular agency or department is tasked with doing, right? So it all gets back to what is this federal entity responsible for? But I'm wondering if Mike and Kit can also speak, and I'm happy to answer a little bit more. Are there some red flags, kind of common things we're seeing people need to take into consideration as they prepare for roles that require that SF-86 and a national security position?
Yeah,
inside the intel community or beyond?
Yeah, so the big ones are considered, most folks really focus on first and foremost, because it comes up particularly of that age, is drug use is first and all most people think about. Drug use is actually one of those, each agency has its kind of own type of approach. Right now, for instance, it's almost like CIA, if you're applying to CIA, they recommend not within the last couple of months type of thing, where it used to be 2 years or something in that ilk to be able for marijuana. Harder drugs become a little bit more problematic of it. But drug use, and particularly being able to forthright about your drug use and reporting that on your SF-86 is a big piece of that. Beyond that, ultimately, you think about the other areas of it. So criminal background type of activity, another one. And then ultimately one of the others is whether or not your foreign affections and or foreign connections. So when we think about foreign affections, do you have family members and where they are? How close are you? How many are there? Or do they have connections with government or intelligence? Those are the questions that a lot of work they're going to be coming into talking about in terms of family members of that as well. Then your sort of your foreign affiliations or connections, they're going to say, do you have so close and or continuing contact with someone from a foreign national level? The key of it is those, particularly when it comes down to it, is that it's not that you can't have it, it's that you need to report of it, report them, and being transparent throughout all of this process. And the same goes through the entirety of that SF-86. Whether it's the mental health portion of it, they can't decline or they can't, in and of itself, seeking out assistance and or care for your mental health is not a reason by which they can issue you a clearance. The fact that you are, and it says very specifically on the form these days, the fact that you're out there seeking that is actually is a credit to it, and they will not hold that against you. So as a result of it, what it comes down to it is mostly the fact that the issue isn't necessarily that you have these things in your past, because everybody has some elements of these, is that you have that you're being forthright on that form and throughout that entire process in terms of it, so that no one can use it as a piece of leverage against you at a future date. It's not a judgment in terms of into your self-worth. It's more about many cases is, can you be trusted to divulge and tell, be forthright, and ultimately not lie on those things. But that in and of itself is a whole other section, and we can have to
2.0. Great. So it looks like some questions came in earlier about, where do you find these postings? I answered a little bit in the chat. Starting with the intelligencecareers.gov website is a really good place to get an overview. Ron, when you're talking about different occupations and where fits are with different disciplines or academic backgrounds, the best thing to do for students who are interested but not sure is to start playing around with individual agency and departments sites. They're going to be pretty clear, have sample position descriptions for things. And many of them are doing a lot of great work in kind of describing what different roles are. So there, and then some you will need to apply through their portals. Many of these accepted service intelligence entities have the ability to kind of do their own thing and not have to post on USA Jobs. So they take advantage of that opportunity to do it in a good way, right? So you'll want to do things through their own portals. But there are many intelligence, occupation, and opportunities on USA Jobs as well. And so if that's what you're interested in, especially like military roles, have a look there on USA Jobs as well. And coaching can help you think through searches and other tools for refining where to go once you've started doing your umbrella search.
So and that foot stomp, when searching in USA Jobs, the best way to do it, particularly if you're doing a broad search and you're in the early stages, you're canvassing where the breadth of opportunities, use the code. So 0132 would be an intelligence officer position. And then 0130 is another one, which is a foreign affairs specialist. Also, in many cases, they do intel type of things. And then there are other ones that are out there. I would say the 0300 for other aspects, but that's generally starting at the 0132 and 0130 will cover pretty much the waterfront for entry level and other positions. So I see one question about students with mental health and medications and ADHD. What have we seen then regarding that application, and are they considered? Yeah, I have seen that and been asked that as well. Again, it is as long as they're demonstrating in that section that they're seeking counseling or that they're being medicated, is not a fact of disqualification for it. What generally will trip someone up is if they don't acknowledge that or they don't seek it. And generally, I think I think there is something when it comes down to it where they are either forced or remanded or being into that may get into it. But a voluntary seeking treatment and being even say on that form that you're actually adhering to that treatment as prescribed by as a doctor or a psychiatrist, that is something where that is not going to be a disqualification.
Okay, well, we're about at time. So this is Wendy again, and I'm just going to jump in and I first just want to thank our facilitators today, Michael, Cassidy, Erin, Ferree, and Kit Thompson. Thank you for joining us. This was fantastic. I've learned a lot. And I just want to give a round of applause to you for preparing and presenting a great webinar for us. And thank you, everyone. So everyone give some applause. So a little bit of technology or technical steps. What happens next is I am recording this. It will go through a process of transcription and things like that. And so we'll be sharing that out later. I expect that to be about a week or so. That takes a little bit of time. So, and I will share it out with the registered users, and I will also be sharing it through our YouTube channel. And we have a specific channel for these kinds of things. And so thank you, everyone. And thank you again for our facilitators. I'm going to stop recording now.